Hello, my name is Deanne Whittemire Olson, and I am the Director of Scientific Projects and Special Projects at the American Society of Health System Pharmacists. The title of my presentation is Quality Improvement Methodologies. Here is the relevant financial relationship disclosure. These are the learning objectives that will be covered during this presentation. These are the key abbreviations that will be displayed in this presentation. Let's start with a self-assessment question. Which of the following quality improvement methodologies emphasizes the elimination of waste from processes? PDCA, Lean, Six Sigma, or CQI? In this presentation, we will talk a little bit more in depth about the quality improvement methodologies that were introduced in the prior presentation. These include the PDCA cycle, Lean, Six Sigma, and Lean Six Sigma. As a reminder, PDCA cycle is frequently used interchangeably with the PDSA cycle, where S stands for study instead of check. The PDCA cycle is also referred to as the Shewhart cycle. In my opinion, the PDCA cycle is the most important to learn because it is core to both the Lean and Six Sigma methodologies, and that is why we will focus on the PDCA cycle in this presentation. The primary difference between PDCA versus Lean and Six Sigma is that the improvement cycle in Lean and Six Sigma have different names. Lean and Six Sigma each have a different emphasis on how to improve, which we'll touch on later, as well as their recommended quality improvement tools. However, ultimately, all QI initiatives come down to the PDCA cycle framework. Because it is the most basic QI methodology, it is also the simplest to learn. There is no need to invest financial resources in training to learn the PDCA cycle. In contrast, official training programs for Lean, Six Sigma, and Lean Six Sigma can be expensive. This slide shows the cyclical nature of the PDCA methodology. We will talk about each of these 4 steps in more depth. The first phase of the PDCA cycle, and the phase that I think is the most important, is planning. This is the phase where we identify our opportunity for improvement by asking, what is the problem we are trying to solve, or what is the issue we need to address? Do we need to address this issue to meet the expectations of an external entity? Remember that external entities can include a regulatory body, such as a state board of pharmacy or health department, an accreditation organization, such as the Joint Commission or DMV, a third-party payer, such as CMS, or a quality and safety organization. Have we collected baseline data about our problem, and what does that data tell us? One of the most important questions to consider in the planning phase is who should be involved in solving the problem, as this will help us to form our quality improvement team. As a team, we should theorize what the root cause of our problem is, or, as is more likely the case, the root causes. What will we need in terms of financial, people, time, and training resources to implement the new process we want to try? During the planning phase, it is critical that the team be very clear about what it is attempting to achieve. Most of you are probably already familiar with the concept of establishing SMART goals. SMART is the acronym for goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-based. Examples of SMART goals are provided in another presentation in this certificate. The team also needs to consider what it will use as measures. As we talked about in the last presentation, there are 4 types of quality measures. They include structure, process, outcome, and balancing. As the QI team discusses possible new processes to address the issue at hand, first consider a structure measure to determine if you have the resources needed to implement your process in terms of staff, equipment, capacity, and systems. In the example of the weekend medication history taking program staffed by interns in the last presentation, some of the structure measures we need to think about before we move to implementation include things such as how many interns do we currently have working on the weekends? Is the current number of interns enough to support the new process we want to try? How many of our interns have received training in medication history taking? Once the team has satisfactorily addressed these structure measures, then it can move on to decide which of the other types of measures it wants to use. Is the team creating or redesigning a process that will address a process measure or an outcome measure? Remember that process measures are the activities or interventions we do because we have reason to believe that performing these activities or interventions consistently will result in a desired outcome. The team may also want to consider a balancing measure to monitor for positive and/or negative impacts of the new or redesigned process on other aspects of the system. As the team is establishing its measure or measures it will use for the QI project, an important question to consider is what data are needed to monitor the measures. Will you be able to collect the kind of data you need to monitor for the measures you've set? What are the source or sources of that data? If the team isn't sure what data it needs or how to obtain it, ask the quality professionals in your organization for help. They are very familiar with collecting data and the many sources of data throughout the organization. If the data that your project requires isn't already being collected, the quality professionals in your organization can also provide you with suggestions to implement your own collection processes for the type of data you need to determine if your initiative is meeting its goals. Another very important decision for the QI team is whether the new process or intervention will be implemented on a small or large scale. For most QI initiatives, starting with a small test of change, sometimes referred to as a pilot program, is preferred. An example of this would be to limit the implementation of a new process to a single nursing unit as opposed to all nursing units. Implementing projects in a limited way allows for the QI team to monitor how the new process is going and work the kinks out, so to speak, while only impacting a relatively small number of people. However, sometimes it makes sense to fully implement a new process because the change will ultimately only impact a small number of people anyway. An example of this might be a QI project involving the pharmacist and pharmacy technicians in one of the satellite pharmacies. Another question for the team to consider is how long it will take to prepare for implementation. What are all of the tasks that must be accomplished before the new process can be launched? And who specifically is responsible for each of those tasks? Module 6 of this certificate includes presentations about project management and the functions of committees. Both of these presentations provide the basics of managing implementation of new projects and assigning roles and responsibilities to those involved. It is critical that tasks are assigned to those who have a high degree of commitment to the new process, have the authority to make the changes, or have been given the authority to carry out the tasks for which they are responsible, and will do so according to an established timeline. I think of the do phase of the PDCA cycle as showtime. This is when the new process will be implemented for the first time, either on a small or large scale. During this time, it is very important for all members of the team to be aware of how the process seems to be working. Members of the QI team should be observing and asking those who are directly involved in the new process about how they think things are going. Ask them about any problems they are experiencing with the new process and suggestions for how to improve the process. Each team member should document their observations of the new process and the comments received from those they have talked to who are directly involved in the new process, so that this information can be brought back and shared with the full QI team. Collection of data, as determined in the planning phase, is also occurring during this time. My opinion is that the objective data collected about the new process during this phase, as well as the subjective comments and suggestions from those directly involved in the new process, are of equal importance. The objective data will show the team whether or not the new process is making progress toward the goal. But the subjective comments and suggestions from those directly involved in the new process provide insight into where the glitches are in the new process and how the process can be improved. The check phase of the PDCA cycle, also frequently referred to as the study phase, is the time when the team will analyze the data it has been collecting to determine if the new process has resulted in reaching the goal. This is also the time for the team to have open conversations about unintended consequences of the new process or positive or negative surprises that occurred during implementation. What about the new process proved to be a success, and what were the failures? The third phase of the PDCA cycle is ACT. I further divide this phase into 3 possible courses of action: adopt, adjust, or abandon. We will talk about each of these possibilities. If the team determines that the new process has resulted in achieving the established goal, and the new process was implemented on a small scale, then it is time to make plans to expand the new process to additional areas or perhaps full implementation. This is also a critical time for hardwiring the new process. It is possible that new processes will initially result in achieving the established goal. However, people are creatures of habit and tend to fall back to using previous processes. It is critical during this phase to continue to collect data and monitor that the goal is being achieved on a consistent basis. If the new process results in achievement of the goal initially, but then the data trends back toward pre-process change levels, then that is a sign that the new process has not yet been hardwired. Hardwiring a new process can be difficult, and it definitely doesn't happen overnight. The team needs to consider why the new process is not being followed consistently and what it can do to help those directly involved to make the new process a habit. Once the new process has been hardwired, as demonstrated by data confirming that the goal is consistently being met, the PDCA cycle for this particular QI project can end. The question that frequently arises is how many months or quarters of data do we need to determine if the process is hardwired and we can end the project? There is not one right answer. It is specific to each project. It is a question that the QI team should discuss and decide about how many months or quarters of consistently achieving the goal they feel they are comfortable with before deciding to end the project. Just a word of caution though. Remember that hardwiring new process is tough, so don't end data monitoring too early, because what may happen is that adherence to the new process may begin to decline, and without knowing it, data has fallen below the goal. The next possible course of action during the ACT phase of the PDCA cycle is adapt. Rarely does the implementation of a new process occur flawlessly. Most often, the QI team will identify during the do and check phases of the cycle that the new process was successful in moving it closer to achieving the established goal, but that improvements need to be made. Interventions to improve the process may include, but are not limited to, implementing changes based on feedback from frontline staff, additional education to reinforce the new process, and/or holding staff accountable for adherence to the new process. Once decisions are made about how to improve the new process, the PDCA cycle begins all over again with the revised process. The next possible course of action during the ACT phase is abandon. After the QI team considers what it has learned during the do and check phases, they may decide that the new process was not at all successful in addressing the issue and that there is no merit in continuing it. It is important to note, though, that abandoning a new process altogether is rare because new processes, even if they are not 100% successful in achieving the desired goal, typically have at least something about them that has proven to be valuable. However, if the QI team determines to abandon the new process, that's okay. It should not be viewed as a wasted effort because the team now knows what doesn't work, and that's good information. In this case, the next step is for the QI team to go back to the drawing board, so to speak, and begin the PDCA cycle all over again, keeping in mind what it has learned. I want to touch briefly on Lean and Six Sigma QI methodologies. Let's start with Lean. If you ever have an opportunity to participate in Lean training, I strongly encourage you to take it. I have found Lean principles and tools to be very applicable to healthcare. Lean connotes an emphasis on eliminating waste in processes. The focus of Lean methodology is on the customer's needs. An important Lean tool is called value stream mapping. This is an activity where each and every step of a process is mapped by those involved. Once the team has the map to view, it works to identify the steps that are not valuable in producing a product or service for the customer. The steps that are not valuable are considered waste and should be eliminated from the process. Lean is based on what it has identified as the 8 wastes in healthcare. These include waiting or idle time, and this doesn't just apply to patients waiting, but to staff who may be waiting who are involved in processes as well. The second waste is excess inventory. The third waste is defective products or services. And the reason this is considered a waste is because resources were invested in the production of that product or service, and now those resources have been wasted, and more resources must be invested to fix the defective product or service. Unnecessary transportation and motion are also considered wastes. An example of wasted motion is having to take unnecessary steps during a task because the placement of items is not efficient. Overproduction, or producing more than what is needed, is another waste, as is overprocessing. Overprocessing refers to handling a product or performing certain aspects of a task more often than is necessary or valuable. And the last waste in healthcare is that of untapped human potential. To address this waste, we have to ask how we can utilize our people resources in ways that we aren't currently using them, but that would add value to our products and services for our customers. Let's talk briefly about Six Sigma. The emphasis of Six Sigma is to use statistical analysis to monitor processes so that products created are free of defects. The goal is to eliminate defects such that processes reach Six Sigma, which means that very close to 100% of products are free of defects. Six Sigma has its own versions of the PDCA cycle, one for improving an existing process and the other for designing a new product, service, or process. The acronym for the cycle for improving an existing product is DMAIC, sometimes referred to as DMAIC. This stands for Define, Measure, Analyze, Improve, and Control. The acronym for designing a new product, service, or process is DMADV. Define, Measure, Analyze, Design, and Verify. For those organizations interested in utilizing Six Sigma as their primary QI methodology, staff can be sent to training and take exams to achieve various levels of mastery of the Six Sigma methodology, so that organizations can have their own in-house Six Sigma expert. You may see training opportunities and books for Lean Six Sigma. Lean Six Sigma is what it sounds like, a combination of the principles of both Lean and Six Sigma QI methodologies. Now let's return to our self-assessment question. Which of the following quality improvement methodologies emphasizes the elimination of waste from processes? PDCA, Lean, Six Sigma, or CQI? And the correct answer is Lean. As its name suggests, Lean methodology focuses on minimizing waste. In conclusion, let's review a couple of key points from this presentation. The most common quality improvement methodologies are the PDCA cycle, Lean, Six Sigma, and Lean Six Sigma. The 4 phases of the PDCA cycle are plan, do, study, and act. Thank you for your time and participation